When my grandfather first got to America, he had virtually nothing. He had, somewhere along the line, he acquired a bicycle. It didn't have any rubber tires, but it had the rims. And he would hang paint cans on the handlebars, put his stepladder on the top, and push it down the street to get to the job. I don't think there's too many other businesses that ever started that way.
And he apparently worked just a very, very short time for someone else doing some painting and other work around the city when he decided he went off on his own. So he started his own painting company, George Goedecke Painting.
And so he started his business in Manchester, New Hampshire, working by himself at first. He was a skilled craftsman, so it was easy to get work, but he had virtually no money.
And I think of great-grandfather, he was a hard worker, and he started his whole business from the ground up, just with him and a bicycle and a ladder, and he would paint whatever people wanted painted.
Quitting was never an option in a sense, and I think that when it comes to business, overcoming obstacles and finding better ways to do things and innovate, trying new things, not being afraid to fail. And I think all those things were a recipe that really got us where we are today.
His hard work was also a determination to do an excellent job. He was not someone who did it halfway. If he did it, people knew, oh, Goedecke painted that. He created our reputation for quality and follow through and for doing it right and doing it right the first time. And if the customer wasn't happy, then figuring out a way to make them happy.
Of course, it was tough getting business at first, but the First Presbyterian Church on 2nd Street was originally known as the German Church because there was a huge German community on the west side. Apparently some fairly influential and wealthy people that went to that church, and the ladies in the church started talking. They got together and they sort of helped him get some business to get started. So he did some work at one of the houses, and pretty soon he was being asked to work in other houses.
And then word of mouth, and the word of how amazing his painting was, the high skilled as a real artist, and being able to do those things that a lot of people hadn't seen.
And once he got started and people saw what his quality of work was, it just grew from there.
Thinking like what George did, and if Peter and I had to do that today, wow, talk about fortitude, because he must have always worked 80-hour weeks.
Yeah, I think back then, for them it was in some ways harder, at least a lot more hours, because you were labor, your accounts payable, your accounts receivable, you're all the things for the business. So I don't have to know how to do everything like they did. And so for them, the work never ended, because you work all day doing the manual labor, now the business side in the evening. So
to persevere through hard times and just finding your employment, finding your paycheck every week and every month, that must have been so difficult, because he was saving up enough money so that his wife and the children could come over, because he was all alone in this country.
The plan was for his wife and 3 children to come over shortly to join him.
He'd send money back, and Grammy would be saving it up so that they could get tickets so that eventually they could come to this country.
Unfortunately, the United States put an immigration ban on, so everything was on hold. So they had to stay over there. It wasn't until 1925 that they arrived in this country, malnourished and sick. It was pretty sad shape.
By the time he called for the family to come, he had rented an apartment, and when they got here, Grammy looked at the apartment, and she was used to having a home. And she said, "No, we're going to have a house.
From what I understand, she didn't really want to live in an apartment and wanted my grandfather to buy a house. And they ended up buying a house on Avon Street in the west side of Manchester.
And that was where the business, there was a small shed and a 2-stall garage. And he operated out of the west side there.
And because great-grandfather was such a skilled painter, and not just a painter, but had been trained to be the finest of painters and in that attention to detail, then, you know, he was able to train and to polish the people that he hired.
Grandpa was good at teaching. If a man had potential, he would encourage them and you know, offer them extra help, show them how to do it, because he knew how to do all of this. So he could show them actually how to hold the brush a little differently so that they could get a smoother stroke when they were cutting in, things like that.
And there was also a struggle they talked about where they would train a new painter and get them really up to speed. And then they would go out on their own and start their own business. And so that's always a tough thing. You know, when you're known for being the best, those people that want to learn, who really want to do the best work, they want to work for that person. They want to find out how he does it.
One of his first employees was Herbert Paul, who later went on to become one of our biggest competitors. We had one of the largest paint crews in the town, anywhere from 10 to 12 men in the winter. We might expand in the summer to 30 or 40. Some of the commercial painters had more people, but they had less skill. They bought pre-mixed paints because they didn't know how to put them together. And they didn't know the finer work to make a job look really smooth. There's a lot in the mixture of the paint so that the paint would level properly. And when I say level, it would come out with a smooth surface, not a grainy surface. Grandpa knew a lot about the composition of paint because in mixing the various colors, some were mixed with different oils as well as different pigments. And there were some paints probably had 3 or 4, maybe even 5 or 6 pigments. He knew what paint needed to be a good quality product because he wanted his work to last. And he was very adamant about he was only going to use the best stuff and not take shortcuts.
I think, you know, he held his crews to a very high standard, and they knew that. And so to be a Goedecke painter was something to be proud of.
He instilled the fact that when we did a job, we wanted it to be done right, to look great, and to last. Because we knew that if the job held up and lasted a good long time, we'd be the ones that would get the call back. So it was a very successful business, and we were very much in demand. We were doing a lot of business in West Manchester, but actually then my grandfather bought a home on Union Street, a great big Victorian home that had a barn. It could store the paints and the ladders and all the materials that we needed, where we would mix the paints. We were manufacturing our own paint, really. At that time, lead paint was the paint that was used on all the houses in pretty much New England. We actually bought the white lead, and it was broken up with your bare hands, and then it could be, it was like a paste, and then mixed with linseed oil and other dryers and such, and made into the paint. The reason that lead was used so much is that lead was extremely resistant to the sun. So that made it ideal for exterior painting. We used very little lead on the inside. Only exception being the sills, the window sills and the mullins and muttons of the panes of glass. Those needed the resistance from the sun, otherwise they'd just powderize and shortly break down. So when the Depression hit, my grandfather was sick with lead poisoning and couldn't work for a period of time, about 6 months. So things were pretty tight. My dad, Herbert Goedecke, probably saved us from going out of business at that time.